serial offender who should never have been released.
This isn't a coincidence. Please don't let him go this time.
With a hatred that exploded into terrifying violence.
He likes to cause them pain. He likes to see the blood. He likes to make them frightened. He just enjoyed it.
This murder town is Rotherham. Killers are unpredictable. They can attack anyone at any time. Their motives are often varied.
And chillingly, in a number of cases, their reason to kill is completely unknown.
Some can be organised and planned with meticulous efficiency,
whilst others are more opportunistic.
They live amongst us in our towns and cities, and one thing sets them apart from the rest of society: their terrifying capacity to kill. Welcome to Murdertown.
Do you feel it in the air? Everything is changing, a world wasted by fear. Something wicked this way comes, something wicked this way comes. It's been around since time began, a million times around the sun. Something wicked this way comes, something wicked this way comes.
This is Rotherham in South Yorkshire. Located between Doncaster and Sheffield, it's home to just over 100,000 residents. The town takes its name from the River Rother, which flows through the town centre.
Rotherham's like any traditional Yorkshire town. It's got a big town centre, it's developing, and it's coming up as the likes of Doncaster. Obviously dwarfed by cities like Leeds and Sheffield.
It's got its problems. They have the sex workers, the red light districts, but it also got some really nice areas of Rotherham.
Because people are passionate about where they're from, anyone you ask, their hometown means a hell of a lot to them. Rotherham in itself is one of the more kind of up-and-coming towns, but what's hiding there is its criminal underbelly. There's always crime, and in particular, very heinous crimes, and there's things that happen behind closed doors, including the big child sexual exploitation case, which started off in the 80s, which actually came up to 2013. I've been covering Rotherham now for 5 years. The majority of stories that I've done and been grisly, gruesome murders to do with drugs, money, gangs, and child exploitation. Some of the most shocking cases I've ever come across have been in Rotherham.
One such case began with the discovery of the body of a young woman, and this would open the door to solving another murder that had confounded the police for over 20 years.
On the 8th of April 2019, Elena Gralikova's body was found just over there, by a stream. She was naked and had been partly buried under grit and stone.
She had been dead for some time, and a post-mortem examination established that she had died following compressions to the neck. She had been missing for over 3 months, having disappeared on Boxing Day 2018, and the discovery of her body was no coincidence.
Elena was found by police officers who'd been searching the area to specifically try and locate her.
Chillingly, the area where her body lay was just meters from one of the last places she was seen alive, the Fitzwilliam Arms Hotel.
In 2008, Slovakian Elena Gralikova made the decision to move to the UK in search of a better life. Along with her husband and 4 children, they chose to settle in Rotherham.
They had 4 children in total. Ultimately, those kids were everything to her. But she started on small-time drugs like cannabis and then working towards cocaine and then hooked on heroin.
Elena's search for a better life didn't go as planned when in 2013 her marriage broke down and things started to spiral out of control.
She had split up from her husband and had a disagreement with her then partner.
She had a drug problem, very chaotic lifestyle, and that led to her ending up as a sex worker. She rang her mother in Slovakia and she was a bit down and she's saying she was really wanting to turn her life around and she was sick of doing what she was doing.
Despite this desire to improve her circumstances, by 2018, Elena was still struggling to turn things around.
It wasn't unusual for Elena to go missing because of her chaotic lifestyle, so she would perhaps sometimes not ring her children as often as you would expect.
Elena's lifestyle meant that she could often slip off the radar for days at a time. However, on January the 15th, 2019, it had been over 2 weeks since anyone had seen her, and the police declared her as a missing person.
She was reported missing by her husband, her estranged husband, on the 15th of January. There was various reports of sightings of her. There were some reports that she'd maybe gone back to her family in Slovakia, and the main line of inquiry was to find Elena. It was the fact that she hadn't had contact with the children. Her husband, he has custody of the children. I think he was worried more about that rather than her safety at that point. His concerns was the fact that she hadn't contacted her family in Slovakia either.
It wasn't until April 2019 that Elena Gralikova was finally found. Tragically, though, she wasn't found alive.
Elena's body was found on the 8th of April 2019, and that's when it became a murder inquiry. She was found in a ditch at the back of the Fitzwilliam's Arms, which was one of the last pubs she'd been in. It wasn't until the depth of the ditch wasn't as high that her body was discovered.
Not only had the police found a body, they also very quickly zeroed in on a prime suspect who was already well known to the authorities.
I was contacted by the senior investigating officer in South Yorkshire Police in April time, and they came to let us know that unfortunately the body of Elena Gralikova had been found in Rotherham, and Garry Allen was linked to Elena through phone data, and he became their main suspect.
Garry Allen's history as a violent and troubled individual made him a very compelling suspect.
He has a Sexual Offences Prevention Order, a SOPO, and some of Garry Allen's restrictions were he wasn't allowed in the red light district, he wasn't allowed to access the internet, and he wasn't allowed to be in the company of a sex worker.
By questioning her friends and acquaintances, the police had been able to establish a relationship between Elena and Garry Allen.
They would go on to see if their investigation would reveal if he had killed her.
They found some recordings. He is absolutely a man enraged.
Okay, if you knock on my door again, I'm knocking the out of you. It's that simple.
The investigation into the murder of Elena Gralikova had established a relationship between her and a man by the name of Garry Allen. In order to establish if Allen was responsible for her death, the police would have to review Elena's movements on the day she disappeared.
Elena was last seen live on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 2018. CCTV shows her at the Traveller's Arms at 18:37, and she's seen leaving there with a male.
This CCTV footage would prove to be a crucial piece of evidence, with the male featured quickly identified.
Garry Allen was eventually linked to Elena's murder due to CCTV recovered, which showed her leaving his home and then later coming back, and that's at the point where she's last seen.
She's also seen at 19:08 hours walking towards the Fitzwilliam Arms pub. That's at 19:08, and she leaves at 19:10 hours.
The location of this sighting was just metres from the area where Elena's body was found.
And she is seen walking in the direction of Garry Allen's flat.
Police were able to establish that Boxing Day wasn't the first time the pair had met.
From their phone data they found from Elena's phone, Garry Allen met Elena in 2018. When he was interviewed, he agreed he met her in 2018. The evidence was there on his phone.
She didn't meet Garry Allen through her sex work, as far as we know. They actually met at a bus stop, and he claims he was trying to find her work. Police did analyse his phone, and they found disturbing images of women being hurt.
Chillingly, one of the most damning pieces of evidence against Allen was an unusual discovery made in his home.
That shocked the police and threw suspicion on him.
They arrested him for breach of his sexual offences prevention order for being in contact with Elena, who was a known sex worker. And when they searched the house, they found some recordings that Garry Allen had made. And on those recordings, there was an excerpt from 26th of December 2018. Elena went out and she's come back, and at that time there was a heated argument between Garry Allen where he actually manhandled her out of the flat.
The purpose of the recordings was unknown, but the fact that they were made on the same day as Elena's murder was significant. The content painted a disturbing picture.
I understand fully well. You're taking me for an idiot. And I don't need it. And I don't want you. And I don't want this. No, listen. Get the out of my flat, or I'm going to chuck you out.
You don't like me.
Get out! Bed. Get out of bed.
Drink this coffee. Okay.
Get out!
I'm coming here for you.
Get out.
And why can I go?
You can go for a walk.
How long? Wait.
Alan, wait. Goodbye.
He is dead set on assaulting Elena. You can hear the struggle. You can hear him pushing her out the flat. He is absolutely a man enraged.
I don't want you here.
Give me food.
No. I didn't ask you to come here. I'm quite happy to be on my own for Christmas. I'll give a get out of my life. Go on. And Elena, if you knock on my door again, I'm coming out here and I'm going to beat the out of you. I'm not kidding.
I'm here.
No, I'm not giving you a call. I want you to get out of my life, get walking, don't come back here again. Do not knock on my door again.
Thank you.
Okay? If you knock on my door again, I'm knocking the out of you. It's that simple.
Yeah.
She was taking money from him for sexual favours, and I think the fact that she needed more money was the reason she went back there. And I think the reason she asked for water was that she didn't want to leave the flat. She probably felt safe there. From what I know of Garry Allen, he is a loner. He likes his own space, he likes to be on his own, and he felt that she was harassing him and he just wanted her to go.
You have got to be kidding me after what I've just said. Okay? Well, watch your friends. Get over there. I don't want you here. I don't give a get walking. I'm not get the up. Go on. Get walking! Think I'm about. Get walking. I don't want to see you again.
The content of those recordings left the police in little doubt as to who was responsible for Elena's death.
There was a lot of other inquiries ongoing on the South Yorkshire inquiry. There's a lot of people seen, a lot of people interviewed. There was a huge CCTV inquiry. They wasn't saying he was the only suspect. There was other people that were of interest to the inquiry, but it was when they found the body of Elena, they believed they had enough evidence to charge Garry Allen with her murder.
This wasn't the first time that Garry Allen had been charged with murder, though, and the police now had an opportunity to finally solve a 2-decade-old crime that occurred less than 65 miles away.
Allen was known to the police as he had a history of violence against women which had seen him placed under a sexual offences protection order.
And back in 1997, he was implicated in another crime, where the body of a sex worker was found on the banks of the Humber Estuary by 3 schoolgirls.
3 16-year-olds were walking along the Hessel foreshore towards North Ferriby, and that's when they saw what they thought was a body, and that was unfortunately Samantha's body. She was naked from the waist down, partly clothed, and she was laid face down in the mud on the Hessel foreshore. They alerted a dog walker who contacted the police.
The similarities between this victim and Elena Gralikova was startling.
Samantha Class was 29 when she died. She was a mother of 3. Understand she had a drug habit had led her into prostitution. She was using prostitution to fund a serious crack cocaine and heroin addiction. Having spoken to some of her friends and associates, was fairly well thought of, was a nice, a nice person.
At the scene that Samantha, she still had a jacket on, unfortunately, no clothing in her bottom half. She was wearing a boot. There was another boot found nearby which matched the boot that Samantha had on. There was a pair of tights. And then further up Brickyard Lane, there was a pair of knickers. And forensic examination of those knickers supported the fact that they was actually belonged to Samantha.
This brutal murder had a real impact, not just on the community, but also on the police officers who worked the case.
In 1997, when Samantha was murdered, I was a young PC, and it was quite a shock in the community for Samantha's body to be found on Hessel foreshore. I remember it well. The post-mortem examination took place, and practically every organ and body had been damaged through either stamping, kicking, or being run over by a vehicle. She also had a tyre mark on her arm, but the actual cause of death was strangulation.
It was clear that Samantha Class had suffered greatly prior to her death, with her head and body displaying 33 separate injuries. The onus was on the police to quickly find the person responsible.
Forensic swabs were taken, and 2 DNA results came back from the vaginal samples taken from Samantha. One DNA was a casual partner of Samantha's, and he was quickly eliminated from the inquiry. The other DNA wasn't on the national database. As a sex worker, she did have regular people that would pay her for sex. They all had to be traced and interviewed and eliminated from inquiries.
The police launched a mass screening programme, so the men in Hull and the area was able to come forward, give their DNA, and they could match it up with the swab taken from Samantha's body. Over 6,000 people were spoken to, 3,500 statements were taken.
What the police at the time knew was that that would probably be the last person to see Samantha alive. So if they got that match and identified that person, that was their main suspect.
Despite there being traces of DNA on Samantha's body, the mass screening undertaken by the police failed to yield any results. Then in 1998, they got a breakthrough.
We were coming up to not quite a year since Sam had been murdered. I don't think anybody really had been arrested, or those who had been completely eliminated from the investigation. So the police were really struggling at that point as to where do we go from here. It was a junior police officer who actually pulled over a car, and the driver of the car was asked to give a drink driving sample.
His DNA was taken, and that matched the DNA that was found inside Samantha's body. So he was immediately arrested for murder.
It was the biggest stroke of luck the police could have ever wished for.
Alan denied murdering Samantha Class, and at his trial in 2000, he entered a plea of not guilty.
I attended every day, drove to Sheffield every day and back, reported on it. It was quite intense. Prosecution outlined their case, called their witnesses, and Garry Allen, he was a key defence witness, and he did actually take to the stand. The one bit that I recall was when he was asked about Samantha. He said he had no sympathy for her, didn't have any sympathy for her or her 3 children. And you just think, what kind of human being doesn't feel a degree of sympathy? But he didn't feel anything. At the end of the day, he was more concerned about saving his own skin and making sure that the murder actually wasn't pinned on him. He always admitted he'd had sex with Samantha. His defence was, she would have had sex with other people that night, how do you know it's me? Which is a reasonable question to ask, really. How did they know it was him? But the evidence that the prosecution presented on the Sunday, he scrapped his car, which was the car that Sam had had sex with him in. He said that he did it after he found out Sam had been murdered, but actually he did it on the Sunday and there was no publicity around it until the Monday. He knew Brickyard Lane, which was where her body was put into the river. He'd lived there as a child. There's very few access for cars down to the River Humber, and that is one of them. But it's not a well-known route. All the evidence did seem to point to he'd get found guilty. There was never any doubt in my mind.
The jury revealed their verdict, and to the shock of the court, it came back not guilty.
The police stood on the steps of the court, as they normally did, and issued the statement of, we're really disappointed, we accept the jury's decision. And then the key line of, we are not looking for anybody else in relation to this investigation.
The significance of that statement wasn't lost on anyone, and the police clearly believed Garry Allen had got away with murder.
He would approach them, arrange a price, and then he would immediately attack them.
And he went into quite graphic detail about how he would hurt them, what weapons he would use.
Garry Allen had said, I can kill him for you. I am capable, I've done it before.
In April 2019, Garry Allen was arrested and charged with the murder of Elena Gralikova in Rotherham.
This wasn't the first time he'd faced a murder charge. Back in the year 2000, he'd stood trial for the murder of Samantha Class, but had been found not guilty and had been acquitted.
Following his acquittal, Allen made the decision to leave Yorkshire and move to the southwest coastal town of Plymouth. News of his reputation, though, travelled with him.
There was the feeling that, yeah, this is a dangerous man, and he would reoffend. The police, off the record, were saying, he's done it, we are convinced he's done it. But obviously, in the eyes of the law, he was a free man.
As soon as he was acquitted from court at Sheffield, he moved down to Plymouth, where he had a friend that he met while he was in the army. He was staying there. Within 34 days, he attacked another sex worker, and another 13 days later, he attacked a second sex worker. The attacks were very much the same method with Samantha. He was in drink, he would approach them, arrange a price, and then he would immediately attack them.
Nobody thought it would be quite so quick. While there was a level of shock, I wasn't surprised, and even the police officer who phoned to tell me, they weren't surprised either.
Garry Allen was showing all the signs of an individual who'd got away with murder. Emboldened by his acquittal over the murder of Samantha Class in the year 2000, it seemed only circumstances had stopped him from killing again.
Luckily, on both occasions, he was disturbed, once by a member of the public and he ran off, and then the second one by the police and he was arrested.
Allen was charged with assault causing actual bodily harm, and he was jailed for 5.5 years at Plymouth Crown Court.
To do it within 6 weeks of being acquitted, I don't know whether that's a level of arrogance, that he felt he was untouchable because had he committed the perfect murder, he'd got away with it. At that point, there wasn't the opportunity or the facility for him to be tried again for Sam's murder.
Although not put there for Samantha Class's murder, Garry Allen was at least finally behind bars.
And whilst in prison, it became clear that he was a troubled and dangerous individual with a deep-seated hatred for sex workers.
Garry Allen was seen by at least 2 probation officers while he was in prison. He was interviewed and he admitted the assaults on the 2 sex workers. He admitted that they were pre-planned. He admitted that he was in drink, and he said that if he hadn't been disturbed, there might have been a murder. And the probation officer asked about the murder of Samantha Class, and he said, I'm not going to admit anything, or there'll be another trial. Because at that time, obviously, the double jeopardy rule had come in, but he didn't admit anything about the Samantha Class murder then, but he did admit to the attack on the 2 sex workers.
In 2005, the double jeopardy law in the UK was changed, meaning that an individual found not guilty of murder could be tried again should new evidence come to light.
One officer said that he had told them that he fantasised about hurting sex workers, and in particular telling them that they'll not be seen again. And he went into quite graphic detail about how he would hurt them, what weapons he would use, which is deeply concerning that he was having these discussions after being convicted of assaulting sex workers.
He said he did it because he likes to cause them pain, he likes to see the blood, he likes to make them frightened. I think he just enjoyed it.
Despite Allen's disturbing admissions, he was eventually released from prison in 2010 and returned to live in Yorkshire, where he was closely monitored by the police.
He was released from prison and he immediately came back to Grimsby. And he was subject to a MAPA, what they call a multi-agency public protection arrangements, and he was high risk, which is level 3, which is the highest risk. And he got a lifelong sexual offences prevention order, a SOPO. You have various restrictions put on you, and some of Garry Allen's restrictions was he wasn't allowed in the red light district, he wasn't allowed to access the internet, and he wasn't allowed to be in the company of a sex worker.
The police were concerned by Garry Allen's presence. However, his decision to return to the north presented them with an opportunity.
Humberside were told that he was coming back to the area. There was a high-level meeting between the chief officers of how we're going to deal with him. He was constantly surveilled by our surveillance teams, and the undercover operation Misty started in June 2010. The decision to launch it was the assistant chief constable at the time, He was briefed about Garry Allen coming back into the area and there was grave concerns. And the objective of the operation was firstly to assess Garry Allen, protect the public and assess his contact with sex workers. But the other objective was also to befriend Garry Allen to see if he made any admissions that would prove or disprove his involvement in Samantha Class's murder. Garry Allen started associating with the other undercover officers and they wasn't getting as friendly as they hoped. So Ian was introduced, which was a friend. What happened was he was living in Holland, he'd been involved in a stabbing in Holland, needed to get away, and he was coming over on the ferry to Hull. And he had some bloodstained clothing and some other items that he needed to get rid of. The other officers, as far as Garry Allen known, were his friends, took him in the vehicle and they picked Ian up from the dock at Hull. And his story was the same, that he was coming over from Holland, had to get away.
Operation Misty in 2010 was the first step in trying to gain Garry Allen's trust in the hope he would finally open up and confess to something significant.
It took a while. Ian had to befriend Garry. Garry Allen thought he was a friend. He was trying to be a bit of a criminal, knowing that Ian was supposedly a high-level criminal. Garry Allen was trying to befriend him and trying to say things to him. It took a while to build that relationship.
By the end of the year, it seemed like a bond between Garry Allen and Ian, the undercover officer, had finally formed.
In 2 to 3 months, that relationship had been built up, and in December 2010, they had the conversation about these criminals in Holland that Ian had a fight with and that was involved in a stabbing. And Garry Allen had said, well, I can get rid of him for you, I can kill him for you. And Ian's reaction was, well, no, you're not capable. And so Garry Allen said, I am capable, I've done it before. And that's when he went into the detail of what he did to Samantha Class.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, but you're probably not going to want to know me afterwards, but if you want to know, I'll tell you. The truth of the matter is that, years ago when I was depressed, and I had sex with prostitutes about 4 or 5 times in a few years because of the depression and stuff. And I had sex with this prostitute one night, and the condom split, and she said, blah, 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 if you don't, I want your name and I want your address, your money and everything else, I'm going to tell the police you raped me. So I strangled her, and I dumped her in the Humber.
It's really chilling, and you think, for some reason, he's trusted this officer. Obviously, they did a brilliant job, but here he was brazenly making this confession that he'd done this.
There was 2 separate recordings. The first one was on the 1st of December, and then in the 6th of December, he went into a lot more detail about how he murdered Samantha Class.
Well, no, because I mean, that thing with that Samantha Class, as I said, I told you about that, what happened there. The condom split, and she said, well, if you don't give me this, that and the other, and you don't start giving me money and that, I'm going to tell the police you raped me, and I just flipped and I killed her and dumped her. But that's just the way I was then, you know what I mean? I thought, you know what I mean?
The undercover operation was a success, with Allen confessing on tape to the murder of Samantha Class. However, there was a problem.
There had to be some really strong circumstances where the acquittal would be quashed. After Garry Allen confessed, the Assistant Chief Constable went to the Crown Prosecution Service for a decision on whether that was enough compelling new evidence to charge Garry Allen. The Crown Prosecution Service referred it to the Director of Prosecution's office, and it was decided that there wasn't enough compelling new evidence.
This was a crushing blow for the police, and despite their best efforts, they were unable to try Garry Allen for the murder of Samantha Class for a second time.
Unfortunately, the undercover operation was wound down, and Garry Allen was continued to be monitored through the MAPA system.
My blood ran cold. I just remember freezing and just thinking, he's done it again. He's done it again.
Even though police had managed through their undercover sting operation to get Garry Allen on tape confessing to the brutal murder of sex worker Samantha Class in 1997, he was somehow still at large. Fortunately, though, the police didn't take their eye off Allen, as they knew he was a particularly dangerous individual.
I'm Dr. Ruth Tully. I'm a consultant forensic psychologist, and I primarily work with people who've committed very serious violent or sexual offences. There were over 20 years between these two murders, and Garry Allen was tried and acquitted of the first murder initially. I've worked with lots of people who've either been tried and acquitted or not been caught for a first offence, and what that's given them is almost a permission giver. It's told them that there aren't consequences for the behaviour, and in some cases it's contributed to a view that they're above the law and that they won't get caught. It seems like Garry Allen's offending went full circle, so he offended in Yorkshire in relation to the first victim, and sadly he then returned to the same area to commit the second murder. This might have been about familiarity with the area. He may have felt more able to get away with his crime if he was in an area that he knew well. It might also have been about targeting a specific group of people in a specific area. So not only could this have been about sex workers in general, it could have been about those within the community in which he'd lived for quite a long time earlier.
In February 2011, Garry Allen breached his order by attacking a sex worker, and he also assaulted a police officer. So it was decided then he was going to go back and serve a sentence, and it was decided then that they would wind down the undercover operation. Ian wrote to Garry Allen in prison with the view to exiting, with the story that he was moving elsewhere.
Garry Allen's incarceration was only temporary, however, and it wasn't long before this incredibly dangerous individual was back on the streets and offending again.
Garry Allen was released in 2012, and at this time he moved to Rotherham. He was still being managed under the MAPA system, and he was still subject to a SOPA order. In 2015 he was involved in an assault, and he was recalled to prison again for a short period of time. Since 2015, he seemed to find a job and was really under the radar. He was still managed through the MAPA system, but didn't really come into contact with the police.
Garry Allen seemed to be keeping a low profile, but after the events of Boxing Day 2018, he was firmly back on the police's radar.
I remember I was at home and I looked on the Hull Daily Mail website, and the first thing that drew me to it was his face staring off the website. Garry Allen charged with murder of prostitute. My blood ran cold. I just remember freezing and just thinking, he's done it again. He's done it again. How has he been allowed to do it again? We'd had an opportunity to put him away and it didn't happen, and that another family were going through what Sam's family had gone through.
With Allen now charged with the murder of Elena Gralikova, he was also able to be tried once more for the murder of Samantha Class.
I think the key evidence was the two confessions that Garry Allen made. There was a lot of listening to tapes that were probably relevant to the inquiry, but the main breakthrough was the fact that we got a new QC on board who supported the inquiry, and he supported us all the way through the CPS involvement to the Director of Public Prosecutions. His review was that there was enough compelling new evidence to charge Garry Allen. We realised that we would have a lot stronger case if it was tried as a double murder case.
There was almost that relief and just thinking, please don't let him go this time. There's two here. This isn't a coincidence. And then reading a bit more about Elena, and, you know, she was a prostitute and she was vulnerable, and that's pretty much what he did with Sam.
They'd had 20 years of this unsolved murder. If it's not him, then who is it? Are they still walking around our city? Are they still targeting people? Are there other unsolved crimes that they're linked to? Like, do we have a serial killer on our hands? It must have been really worrying.
In June 2021, at Sheffield Crown Court, Garry Allen stood trial for the double murder of Elena Gralikova and Samantha Klass.
The jury at the retrial had the extra evidence of Elena's murder and the fact that it was linked to Samantha's murders. Plus, you've got the extra string of the undercover operation, the confession, the convictions in Plymouth, the breach of the sexual harm prevention order, and the mobile phone analysis. So they had a lot more evidence to interpret.
Garry Allen was charged with 2 murders, murder of Elena and the murder of Samantha. And he was found guilty of both murders and sentenced to 30 years imprisonment.
All the evidence proved damning, and Garry Allen was found guilty of the murder of Elena Gralikova and, after over 2 decades, the murder of Samantha Klass. He was handed 2 life sentences and told he would serve a minimum of 37 years.
To finally have a guilty verdict and see justice being done in a city 20 years later, it must be amazing.
It's personal because obviously you've got high standards, you want to do the best you can, but also the feeling for Samantha's family, their reaction, the reaction of the original senior investigating officer, and that's why it's quite emotional.
Garry Allen was finally behind bars for good, bringing some form of closure to the families of Elena and Samantha and the people of Rotherham and Hull. Although questions remained as to who else Allen might have harmed or even killed.
I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out that actually he's linked to more attacks. As sad as it sounds, I wouldn't be surprised if he's linked to more murders, if there's unsolved murders in the areas that he's been.
To date, no more offences have come to light. However, there is clear frustration that Allen wasn't stopped sooner.
It's frustrating to know that so many women have suffered at his hands, that there was the opportunity back in 2000 to find him guilty of Sam's murder, which actually would have made so many more women safe. Elena would have hopefully still have been here.
The murders of Samantha Klass and Elena Gralikova were disturbing crimes that cast a dark shadow over this area of Yorkshire. Thanks to the efforts of the police, in solving one crime, they were finally able to find Garry Allen guilty of the other. The question remains, though, should the tragic death of Elena Gralikova been avoided in the first place?
It's absolutely incredible that he was finally caught after 20 years. There's always this sadness that if he'd have been caught the first time, all of the other women wouldn't have been violated and targeted in the way that he did.
It's just sad that Elena and her family have suffered at his hands, but in the end, Sam's family also got justice. But it's really sad that somebody else had to die for this to happen.